So, when you think of Victorian poetry, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Flowery language, stiff upper lips, maybe just a whole lot of doom and gloom? Well, get ready to have that image completely shattered. We're about to dive into the surprisingly radical and, yeah, revolutionary world of Victorian poetry.
Okay, we have to start here, right? This is probably the most famous line from the entire era. And this quote from Alfred Lord Tennyson's masterpiece In Memoriam, it just perfectly captures that classic image we all have. Sentimental, a little sad, deeply romantic. And hey, it's beautiful, no doubt about it. But is that the whole story? Was this just an era of poets sighing elegantly in their drawing rooms? Oh, not even close. You see, underneath that polished sentimental surface, Victorian poets were wrestling with massive, world-changing ideas in ways that were experimental, rebellious, and totally groundbreaking. To really understand the revolution, we first have to get a handle on the establishment. And the establishment, well, it had a face. And it had a name. Alfred Lord Tennyson. See, Tennyson was more than just some popular poet. He was the official voice of the nation as the poet laureate. His work was hugely popular, filled with these heroic tales from mythology and old medieval legends. He was an absolute master of rhythm and rich description, and he basically created the sound and the feel that most people came to associate with all Victorian poetry. He was the mainstream.
But here's the thing. While Tennyson was crafting these beautiful, epic verses, the world outside was in total turmoil. This wasn't some peaceful, stable time. It was an age of profound crisis. And that crisis forced poets to find entirely new ways to see the world and to write about it. I mean, just think about what was happening. The Industrial Revolution was exploding, transforming the entire landscape, often with devastating costs to the environment. Brand new scientific discoveries, especially Darwin's theory of evolution, were shaking the very foundations of religious belief. For a lot of people, it felt like the spiritual ground was just crumbling right under their feet. So, how could poetry even begin to respond to that? Well, enter Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was a Jesuit priest and one of the most daring innovators of the whole era. To fight back against this spiritual crisis, he developed his own totally unique theological concepts. He believed everything in creation had an inscape, a unique, divine pattern, like a one-of-a-kind fingerprint, and in-stress was the energy that held that pattern together, the force that allowed us to actually perceive God's design in the world around us. So for Hopkins, nature wasn't just some pretty scenery, it was pulsing with divine energy, almost like an electric current. He saw God's grandeur as ready to flame out at any moment. This was such a mystical, intense way of seeing the world, and it was a direct answer to an age filled with doubt. But Hopkins wasn't just living in a fantasy world. He saw two worlds in direct conflict. On one side, you have God's perfect, charged creation, but on the other, you have the world of humanity, what he called man's smudge. It's seared with trade and smeared with toil. He was truly heartbroken by how industry had cut people off from the sacred beauty of nature. Now, these new complex ideas, they demanded new forms. Poets couldn't just use the same old familiar tools. They had to invent a whole new language. This rebellion wasn't just in what they were saying, but in how they were saying it. Hopkins did something truly radical. He invented what he called sprung rhythm. Now, traditional English poetry has a pretty regular beat, da-dum, 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 but sprung rhythm just throws that right out the window. It only counts the stressed beats, so you can have these dramatic clusters of stressed words or long runs of unstressed ones. The result is a rhythm that's incredibly dynamic, dramatic, and sounds like absolutely nothing that came before it. Another key innovation was the dramatic monologue, which was perfected by Robert Browning. In this form, it's not the poet speaking. It's a character, a persona. And in one intense speech, the speaker ends up revealing so much more about themselves, their biases, their dark secrets, their psychology, than they ever intend to, all while talking to a listener we never ever hear from. And there is no better example than the opening of My Last Duchess. It's chilling, isn't it? You have this Italian duke, and he's talking to an envoy about a painting of his late wife. But as he keeps talking, we slowly start to realize the terrifying truth behind her death and his controlling psychopathic nature. The form gives us this direct, unfiltered window into a complex and really disturbed mind. All of these experiments with form were part of a much larger debate that was just raging through the Victorian era. What is the actual purpose of art? I mean, is it supposed to teach us how to be good people, or is it for something else entirely? This debate really had two main camps. On one side, you've got the critic Matthew Arnold.
He argued that with religion on the decline, poetry had to step up and become our new moral guide. But then you have poets like Algernon Charles Swinburne, a leader in the aesthetic movement, who argued for art's sake. They insisted that art should be judged on its beauty and its craftsmanship, not its moral message. And for the time, that was a truly radical idea. So we've seen poets challenging religion and form. But what about the structure of society itself? For that, let's turn to Christina Rossetti, who used her poetry to launch a really sharp critique of the world she was living in. Her famous poem, Goblin Market, while on the surface it seems like a simple fairy tale, but it's actually this incredibly powerful allegory. It's really about what it was like for a woman to try and enter the public sphere of business and art, a world that was run by men, by their rules. Let's just break it down. So in the poem, you have these goblin men tempting young women to buy their magical fruits. One sister, Laura, gives in. But she doesn't have any money, so she pays with a lock of her golden hair. Her very femininity becomes a product to be sold. After she tastes the fruit, she just withers away, unable to find any joy in the real world. But here's the crucial part. Her redemption doesn't come from playing the market's game better. It comes from her sister, Lizzie, who bravely faces the goblins and through an act of self-sacrifice saves Laura. And this beautiful line from the poem, it just sums it all up. In a world where the marketplace can be predatory and dangerous, Rosetti's arguing that the ultimate value lies in sisterhood, in solidarity and selfless love. So, when we step back and look at the whole picture, what do we see? Far from being some stuffy, sentimental period, the Victorian era was a poetic battleground. Victorian poets gave us these radically new rhythms, they gave us deep psychological portraits in the dramatic monologue, and they created a literature that grappled with the biggest questions of their time: faith versus science, nature versus industry, and the very structure of their society. They weren't just writing about the past, they were inventing the future of poetry. And all of this leaves us with a final thought. The Victorians faced a world that was being completely remade by technology and challenged by brand new ideas, and they turned to art to try and make sense of it all. So, looking at our own turbulent times, what are the great crises and questions that our artists or poets must confront today, and what will their revolution look like?